This week I sat down and I made my first really big machine knitting project, a pair of socks. These socks. I would have really liked to have purchased a circular sock machine, as I really like to wear and gift hand knit socks, but hand knitting just rows and rows and rows of stockinette can make me want to gouge my eyes out. But what came up on Facebook Marketplace was a flat knitting machine, and I was interested enough in it where I just went for it. So I never really considered, oh, am I going to be able to knit these in the round? I did knit these in the round. They are not, while they were knit on my flat machine, they were not knit flat and seamed. I'm pretty happy with how they turned out. For my first machine knitting project, I thought that I learned a lot. I learned a lot about my machine, and I learned a lot about construction on a machine. I also used the very oldest yarn that I would call like fancy yarn in my stash. So I had bought this yarn way back in 2012, right after I graduated from college. As you can see, it's pretty tonal, so I had been worried that knitting a pair of socks in it, if I had done anything too spectacular with the pattern, that it would have really washed out the yarn. So I'm glad I didn't do that, and I really like them as vanilla socks. I made a lot of mistakes. I learned a lot. I hope that you enjoy the process of seeing how this all went. To begin, I cast on using waste yarn. This will allow me to do a hung hem cuff. If I were knitting by hand, I would rib, but knitting machines aren't good at purling. You can get a ribber, which is a second bed of needles that I do have on this machine, which can be used to knit rib flat or to knit in the round, but you can't actually rib in the round. Because of that, I did a hung hem, which is similar to how I knit some of the brims of hats. Basically, a double layer of knitting at the cuff. I start by casting on to white waste yarn, and then I adjusted my carriages for knitting in the round. Something I sometimes forget to do is add weights. My machine requires weights to hold the work out of the way and to pull it out of the bed of the needles. If you don't add weights and you're supposed to, it can really screw up your cast on, which is another great reason to cast on using waste yarn. Here I switch to the main color and keep knitting. I also reset my row counter. After one round at a looser tension, I tighten the tension up, which is basically the same as going down a needle size, to make my cuff nice and tight. Next, I actually hang the hem. I take the live stitches along the waste yarn edge and hang them individually on each needle. This process takes some time and is pretty fiddly, especially when using a darker yarn. I drop down the ribber to get to the stitches from the inside of the sock in order to hang them. With the cuff complete, it's time to go on to the leg of the sock. This is where the knitting machine really shines. 100 rows of stockinette goes by far, far faster by machine. And onto the heel. This is the critical part that brings the sock to life. Dropping down the river, I'm working just half of the stitches for the sock using short rows, and I'm doing that flat. When moving back and forth between flat knitting and knitting in the round, you have to change out your sinker plate for the appropriate attachment plate. I actually realized after I'd cast off that I was working my wrap and turns wrong, so unfortunately my heels have some holes that I have chosen to seam up. There are some other methods that you can use to knit socks on a knitting machine, such as doing an afterthought heel and knitting it by hand, but for my first pair I decided to just do short rows. After finishing the short rows, I replaced the sinker plate with the attachment plate again, lifted the rubber, and worked a bunch more stockinette. Now, nearing its finish, we do some toe shaping. First decreases are worked every other round before decreasing every round, tapering the toe. It took longer to hang the hem and to do the decreases than to knit the entire rest of the sock. You can see coming up where I actually dropped a stitch and had to fix it before I could move on. I find fixing mistakes with machine knitting significantly more frustrating than fixing mistakes with hand knitting, partially because the work that I'm doing right now is on a relatively fine gauge yarn. Finally, at the toe of the sock, we have one last step, casting off. Using the waste yarn once again, I secure the stitches in place with a couple of rounds of waste yarn, and I'm ready to Kitchener the toe. You can probably see that there are some imperfections in these socks. Overall, I'm pretty happy with them. I did have a few issues with drop stitches or areas where the yarn got caught on the gate pegs. You can also see that there are pretty big holes along the heel where I was improperly doing my wrap and turns.